Thank you so much, Mr. Watts, for speaking to Press Trust of India. C40 has been in existence since the last 2 decades. If you could help us understand that what tangible progress has C40 cities made on climate action, particularly in the last few years?
We're a network of just under 100 of the biggest cities in the world. And the result of that collaboration is 75% of our member cities are cutting their emissions faster than their respective nation states. I think they should be, but it's that collective working that's really made that happen. We can see really tangible things, particularly in the last few years, like now a 7% reduction in air pollution across C40 cities. That means over 100 million people are now able to breathe safe air that weren't able to do so before. And perhaps it's the sort of less easy to kind of make tangible, but it's a condition of membership of C40 that all of our cities have to have a climate action plan that they're delivering that's consistent with the Paris Agreement targets to constrain global temperature rise below 1.5 degrees. And that's a huge achievement in the context that even this year, 10 years after the Paris Agreement, still most nation states do not have an action plan that's consistent with that Paris Agreement.
Right. Considering the ambitions of C40 and the targets of C40, which cities do you think that stand out as a leader on urban climate policy, and what's driving its success?
Well, that's always the hardest one for me because there's 100 members to choose from, and they're all leaders in many things. I think starting in India first, I've been really impressed with Mumbai. It's the first, or was the first city in South Asia to have a climate action plan consistent with 1.5 degrees. But more than that, it's been one of the real global leaders in introducing something called climate budgeting, which is marrying the annual financial budgeting process with the annual carbon emissions target. We've seen other cities in Europe and North America, United States, New York, London, Paris doing that, but Mumbai has really led in the global south. I mean, I think elsewhere, my home city of London definitely deserves a mention. Its clean air zone, the ultra low emission zone, is the biggest in the world, the toughest standards, and it's now enabled people in London for the first time in decades to be breathing air that's consistent with global health standard. It's cut NO2 emissions 50%, and we know just how big an issue clean air is in most big cities around the world. And then perhaps a last example. I love what the Latin American cities have been doing on clean transport. Bogotá, for example, has not only one of the biggest electric bus fleets outside of China, which is absolutely the leaders here, but it's been the first of our big cities to have a whole route of those electric buses where all of the drivers are women.
Okay, but talking about the difficulties, which areas do you think, say, clean air transport or energy or waste, which area do you think is proving to be most difficult for cities to address effectively?
It really depends on the level of development. I'd say for the big, fast-growing cities of South Asia, of Africa, Latin America, the big issue actually is urban planning. It's getting the governance in place to be able to get a control of that development so that it's sustainable for the long term. Because what we see in the already very highly developed economies is that the failure to do that means you lock in really high emissions and pollution and lower quality of life ultimately for people. So it's why so in India we've been working with community Jameel and with Chennai. Chennai is the first of our cities to now adopt their climate targets into the master plan, the spatial development plan for the city. So I think that's a big one, but it's hard not to talk about clean air because that's the issue that affects people's daily lives so much, but inextricably bound up with climate change as well, because those same emissions from industry, from cars, from heating system that hurts our lungs today is damaging the atmosphere in the long term. There we're seeing progress where city authorities are really willing to bring in really strong regulation that give very clear direction to markets and consumers on things like clean vehicles or heating that creates a big change.
Right. But there are several cities whose core infrastructure heavily rely on fossil fuels. And
Mm.
while several cities have shown intentions to phase out fossil fuels, their actual ability to phase out fossil fuels and fully do so is limited by legal, economic, or say structural factors. So where do these cities stand actually?
Well, I think, what we encourage our members to do, because city governments don't typically have, they haven't got the wide-ranging powers of a federal and national government, but to focus where they have really got powers. So the ones that control their energy infrastructure, you look at Los Angeles in the United States, it's the single biggest owner, public owner of solar power infrastructure and battery infrastructure. And they took the very forward-thinking decision under Mayor Eric Garcetti, who went on to be the US ambassador to India 10 years ago, to announce that they were closing down their gas-fired power stations 10, 15 years earlier than the normal life expectancy. And we're going to invest instead in that solar. And now their citizens enjoy clean, cheap power as a result of that forward-thinking investment. And they worked very carefully with labour unions to ensure that nobody lost their jobs as a result of that transition. People were able to be retrained. But I think, in other areas, you've got to look where the biggest problems are and where there is an ability to change. I was in India in December, and as part of our lane shift program with Amazon Climate Pledge, huge distribution company, they're looking at the fact that in India, freight is accounts for 40% of emissions from transport. It's off the scale compared to most other countries, and the sector is growing incredibly quickly, and the market hasn't really responded to produce electric trucks in the way that has been the case for buses that are easier to regulate. So there we now seeing between Bengaluru and Chennai, trialing right at the moment in that lane shift program 20 heavy duty electric trucks, just to demonstrate that it is possible to have electric trucks. And if you could then sort of see the market opportunity for investment to create a domestic industry in those e-trucks that can be sold all around the world, as well as actually reducing the operating costs of the fleet operators, there's a chance to significantly reduce what would otherwise be ever increasing fossil fuel emissions from the transport sector through that fast growing freight.
But considering the data of fossil fuel reliance of several countries, say United States, China, India, Japan, uh, despite their endorsement of several initiatives which support phasing out of fossil fuels, do you think that like it's very ambitious to think about that, or is it really possible to achieve the target of phasing out fossil fuels for these particular countries that are heavily reliant on fossil fuels?
Well, I think it's completely possible, and we've seen it's a lack of political will is causing us to go much more slowly than is necessary for the future of the human race. And lack of political will because of really strong lobbying by vested interest in those fossil fuel industries. But I think it's very clear on a technological basis. Solar, wind power is now cheaper in almost every part of the world than producing electricity through oil, gas, and coal. And of course, it produces none of the emissions that damage our health. We've seen extraordinary expansion of renewable energy, particularly in China, but also in some of those countries that you mentioned. The United States, in the heart of the oil industry in Texas, the state has invested very heavily in wind power. Austin in Texas has got the majority of its electricity is produced through wind and solar power. So I think it's entirely possible to achieve, but it requires as a whole of society focus on not just the investment in the new renewable energy, but then the reducing of the demand, the wasteful use of energy, so that we can more rapidly phase out the old fossil fuels.
Mr. Watts, I want to discuss about the Asian cities now. Given the
Mm.
challenges and rapid growth in many Asian cities, how do the C40 tailor its approach to these particular cities to support them? If you could help us understand that.
Yeah, well, I think we very much recognise that in Asia, as you say, very fast-growing economies, currently in most cases relatively low per capita incomes and a huge amount of poverty that still needs to be overcome. And therefore, we need to marry a growing economy, increasing the material resources, improving quality of life for everybody, with a much more rapid shift to environmental sustainability than was achieved in Europe or the United States in a similar phase of growth. I think what we also temper the way that we work to recognise different governance systems to that in Europe or North America. So in India, we work very much with the federal government, with the state government, and the city governments, even though we're a city organisation, because that's the way that things get done and work effectively in India. And we're data driven everywhere. We really believe that the success lies in having clear targets, the public sector having very clear plans that then the private sector understands, knows the direction that the regulation and legislation is going to take the market. And we believe in C40 very strongly that the responsibility of the public sector is not just to correct market failure when it happens, but to shape and create markets that will take the whole of society forwards. So we put a big focus on planning. But I think the thing that's universal is every city in the world moves faster if it's able to share and collaborate and copy good ideas from each other. And that's what C40 really engenders.
Right. Talking about India, Delhi specifically, Delhi still faces challenges with municipal solid waste. And this is also something that has been acknowledged in one of the statements in C40, which also said that the city has been actively working on projects to address this particular issue. But in India, solid waste management rules 2016 still remain not implemented on the ground. The rule that says that waste should be segregated at the source. The Supreme Court of India also recently pushed for implementation of it very strictly. With this particular situation, how do you think that Delhi will be able to overcome the challenges, and what projects exactly did the C40 is the C40 talking about in this particular statement?
Well, we are, as always, our approach is to look at the best practice elsewhere in the world and bring that to bear. Often it's really difficult in transigent political situation that makes it difficult to kind of move forward. There's no technological barrier now to separating waste and collecting it. We've seen that in some of the least wealthy cities and some of the wealthiest. Where we tend to focus right at the moment is on the part of the waste that currently produces huge amounts of methane emissions. Begin of that, particularly the food waste, which can be in Indian cities can be a very large proportion of that which is either currently burnt or dumped, because methane is such a fast-acting pollutant in the atmosphere. If one can remove that methane, it has a very big short-term effect in tackling climate emissions, as well as taking away a big health problem. So we work with the Global Methane Hub. One of the things that they've done, which is really game-changing in the last few years, is satellite monitoring of methane emissions. And it just gives a totally different level of data and understanding the scale of emissions, but where they're coming from. You can spot illegal dump sites very easily and then close them down quickly, effectively. But also it just puts more pressure through public information on administrations to do, as you say, to do what's already been promised, what's already committed to in legislation.
My last question is, this is about the challenges that there are several C40 cities. I mean, how C40 views the situations where the member cities approve projects like highway expansions or say new airports, which directly conflict with their target of climate change.
Well, so what we require from our members is that they put together a comprehensive plan for the entire city, all of its infrastructure, all of its citizens, all of its emissions, and that the reduction or tapering off of emissions is consistent with the Paris Agreement targets. That's obviously different for every city depending on their level of development. So we look at the whole thing. Sometimes within that whole plan, there are individual projects that themselves are going to increase emissions, but as long as the whole plan is consistent with the targets, then we sign it off as being consistent with our membership targets. I think what we we're a membership organisation, so we're not a campaigning group. We're not a Greenpeace or anything. We're not out there protesting at what governments are doing. But what we do in private is talk through with the city when we can see within a plan something that looks like it's going to be problematic and difficult, make it difficult to achieve the target. Point that out to them, show them examples of other cities that have dealt with similar issues and how they have overcome them and how they moved beyond them. Make sure they've got the best available information before they make decisions that might be problematic in the future.
Mr. Watts, how do you view this in development in your city, London Heathrow Airport runway expansion that is happening?
I think it's a huge mistake, and it's something the Mayor of London is completely opposed to. We're talking about a huge airport in a very densely populated area that already creates huge amounts of air pollution and noise pollution for residents, where the scale of opposition to the development is very significant and would delay any investment, and where the cost is just enormous to expand the airport, and where frankly there isn't a real need because there's such a scale of short haul flights from Heathrow that could be transferred to rail in particular if the investment was made in that. So I think it's a mistake. I don't think it will ever happen, frankly. I think it's just too difficult to do.
Right. I have another follow-up question with regards to my city, my country, in fact. The Indian government has now exempted nearly 80% of coal-based thermal power plants from installing sulfur dioxide pollution controls as long as they're not aren't in critically polluted zones. This is one development, and the other development is Delhi had come up with a bold policy that is end-of-life vehicle policy, which basically made a rule to deal with old polluting vehicles. But that was rolled back due to public criticism just within 2 days. So, how do C40 see these situations? Because there are policies that can be implemented, but certain policies, bold policies, sometimes are rolled back by the government due to public pressure.
Yeah, we see that all around the world. I think one of the toughest things that politicians have to deal with is there's such a lot of misinformation and disinformation around, propagated usually by vested interests in the fossil fuel industry or the automotive industry, possibly in that case, that public opinion can quite easily be tipped to oppose policies that are actually in everybody's best interests. And most people rationally would understand having less emissions from vehicles is a good thing for all of our lungs. How we tend to help is number one, working with cities before they introduce policies. So they've really thought how they're going to explain them, how they're going to engage communities at a very local level to build support and understanding, so that when the inevitable pushback comes, it doesn't kind of become a roller coaster that quickly changes public opinion. And what we see when we really delve into a lot of the initial opposition is not from real human beings at all. It's just AI generated bots paid for by fossil fuel companies that whip up a storm until 20 of the messages have no effect at all. Then one of them hits a note with ordinary people, and then it starts to whip up. And we've seen that all over the world. But it's possible to overcome it if you just keep being honest and open and engaging with people. I think then, coal, there's no place for coal in the future, burning coal in the future of humanity. It's the dirtiest form of fossil fuel. It's understandable why it's used at the moment, because it's cheap and readily available in some countries, and it's been essential to have that energy to have development, improve people's quality of life. But I think now with the fact that the renewable energy is so much cheaper, we can see that really each individual decision now, it's harder and harder to justify why you would build a new coal power station.
Right. Before we close off, Mr. Watts, what message would you like to give to your C40 member cities?
Well, I'd say congratulations on the success so far, but nothing we've done this far is good enough. I think we say in C40, no one's doing more than the big cities of the world in terms of political leadership to tackle climate change, but even we're not doing enough. And we know it's a real struggle at the moment, particularly with the leadership in the United States, which is the second biggest economy in the world isn't moving in the way it needs to decarbonize. That just puts more emphasis on all of the rest of us. And not as a burden, this is in all of our interests to have cleaner air, lower pollution, a better future for our citizens. And history's on our side.